to welcome Albert.
Albert! That's it. Oh, Jeff was supposed to do that. Hey, Gay. Everybody's here today. So I'm curious if you've ever had a time in your life where, things are bumping along okay. You're in a routine. You're keeping the bills paid, and the lights are on. You got food in your belly, but you're just not enjoying it that much. And instead of focusing on the things that are going well, all you can really think about are the things that you're trying to make better, and the things that aren't right, and the things you wish were different. Can everybody relate to that?
Yes, sir.
And then something comes along, and the bottom falls out, and everything goes to hell. And then you realize how happy you were.
You're all over this out right.
That makes sense? So this happened to me, and I found myself now in the bottom of this well, and I'm thinking of it as a wishing well. Wishing I could at least go back to, that miserable state of routine that I had just, fallen out of. So I'm sitting at the bottom of the well, and the way it came from me was, it was really my business was crumbling. But I wasn't even happy, honestly, when it was going okay, and now it's crumbling, and I'm thinking, what am I going to do? So I have two options. I'm sitting at the bottom of this wishing well, and I'm thinking, well, I can claw my way back up, go back to doing all the things that I was doing before, and that wasn't really going that great, or I can look for a different way. And so what I came to discover was that we all have a magical path of least resistance. And I love the idea of a path of least resistance because if you heard me speak before, my family is plagued with something we call the Pellicet lazy gene. And I want to do things as simple and easy as possible. And the path of least resistance, it sounds really good. And also, everything in nature follows the path of least resistance. Lightning, it takes the path of least resistance. Water, coming down from a mountaintop, it's going to find the path of least resistance. Electricity, everything in nature finds the path of least resistance. So, why not me? I'm sitting down in the darkness, and the only resource I have is this little tiny pamphlet. It's a 13-page pamphlet written in the late 1800s by a man named James Allen, and it's called As a Man Thinketh. And I have this book, and one little side note to the story was, I keep a success journal. One day I was flipping through it, and 20 years ago, I had a note in this journal, read as a man thinketh. And I didn't, of course, it just ended up as a note in this success journal. But here I find myself, in this deep hole, and so I read the book. And this guy, he's an Englishman, and he keeps mentioning that a man will never be what he truly is capable of, unless he meditates. And I'm thinking, meditation, it seems so hippie-like to me. I'm a rational, businessman kind of a guy. This is just not something I'm into. But I operate on this philosophy, I call it the third touch of the universe. And when I hear something mentioned 3 times, maybe sometimes from different sources, I take it as the universe is trying to tap me on the shoulder and get my attention. And I can either listen in that moment and do what it's telling me to do, or I can, go on and continue to ignore it. And I said, I really have nothing to lose right now. I'm in such bad shape. I'm going to give this meditation a shot. Now, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't go read how to do it. I really didn't have time to do it. But I woke up early, an hour earlier than my children woke up every morning, and I would just sit in my living room, in the dark. So I'm sitting in the dark. I'm not really sure what's supposed to happen. And I found that when I slowed down that much, I started getting these great ideas. And the idea of meditation was to clear your mind, but all these ideas kept coming up. It was this creative, brainstorming. And then I so wanted to hang on to this idea that, my meditation was a total disaster. Because I just didn't want to forget this, whatever little nugget that I had seized upon. So I said, you know what? I'm going to take a legal pad, a yellow legal tablet, and I started keeping it right next to me in a pen. And so I would close my eyes, and it's dark anyway, the sun hadn't even come up, and I'm thinking, and when I'd get a good idea, I'd just open my eyes and I would just jot the note down, and then I could let it go and go back to my meditation. So I'm doing this for a couple of weeks, again, totally clueless whether this is doing anything for me, whether this is working. And one day, I get this sort of intuitive notion, and it was like 3 names came to me. And one was Dale Brown. Raise your hand if you know Dale Brown. He's a LSU basketball coach that took LSU to NCAA championships several times. And I'd never met the man or anything before, and so I wrote down Dale Brown. Another one was a local businessman named Louis D'Angelo, and he owned a chain of pizzerias in Baton Rouge. And I write his name down. And then the third one didn't really have a name associated with it, but it was the owner of the local yoga studio, which was about a mile from my house. And so I write this down, and again, I just forget it, and I go back to what I'm doing. So this is bumping along, and 10 days later, I'm with my family, and we go out to eat at a Greek restaurant called Syrops on Jefferson Highway. And it's one of those places that they open for lunch, and then they close, and then they open again at 5:30, and then they close at 8:30. I mean, if you want to eat there, you got to go when they want to serve you. We're walking in around 8 o'clock, so it's closing in 30 minutes, and the restaurant is totally empty except for one table. And who's sitting at the table? It's Dale Brown with his grandson having dinner. And he's somewhat of a celebrity, and I'm not really the kind of person to go get autographs or interrupt someone. And I'm sitting there eating with my dinner, staring at this guy, thinking, I've got to go say something. I just wrote this guy's name down, last week, and here he is. I've never been to an LSU basketball game in my life. I've never seen the guy. I don't watch the news. I've never just ever had any contact with him, and here he is. So I waited till he was finished dinner, and I walked over, and I said, Mr. Brown, excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I see you're having dinner with your grandson. My name is Albert Pellichet, and just recently I joined Toastmasters, and I know you do some speaking, and I just wanted to come and say hi. Oh, Albert, that is great. I'm so glad you're in Toastmasters. That's a good organization. That's going to be so good for you. He says, I tell you what, let me give you one of my cards, and I want you to call me. So he reaches in his wallet, and he says, oh, darn. I must have given the last one out. And usually that's going to be the end of it, if you have no way to contact. And then he says, oh, wait, here's one. And he pulls out his last card. And so he gives me his card. I call him on Monday morning, and we have a little chat, and he sends me a package that arrives in the mail. And in the package, it's the letter he wrote to Shaquille O'Neal when he was trying to recruit him to come to LSU. And he had 2 pages of speaker tips of the things he's learned from the best speakers that he's ever witnessed. And then he had a little handwritten note, and it said, Albert, you can do it. And I'm reading the speaker tips, and the one that really, struck out, I had already maybe done 2 or 3 speeches at Toastmasters, and the one that really stuck with me was something along the lines of this: the best speakers I've ever known, whether I was in their living room or watching them on the stage in front of 1,000 people, you could tell they were just spoken the same way. And I thought, wow, that's really, kind of fascinating. How is that possible? As a young Toastmaster, you're thinking, you have to be an orator and, command the stage. And my wife would call it, that voice. She would hear me practicing. And from the other room in the kitchen, I hear it, you know, and I'm like, oh, you know, it was just hard to break out of, you know, that voice. But here I was really motivated by what he said, and it changed my whole approach and what I was even attempting, you know, to do when I spoke. So that was all well and good. So here I'm thinking, you know, every time I go out to eat, I'm keeping a lookout for those other two people, right? The pizza guy and the yoga studio owner. I'm just thinking, hey, they're going to knock on my door at any moment. And, you know, 8 months go by. I never ran into them. I never took any action related to these other two people. And it was Christmas of 2013, and I was on vacation. My family thought it would be a good idea that we all rent a big giant house in Colorado for Christmas. And you know, that always sounds like a great idea, right? We're all going to go, we're going to bring our kids and our friends and stuff, and we're going to share the expenses, and we're going to live in this house. And you know, it's all great, but I need some peace and quiet, you know, even on vacation. So I found myself retreating to a bedroom here and there and reading this second book called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. Write that down. And I'm reading the book, and he talks about something called resistance. And I was really fascinated by this. And so what he was defining as resistance was, it's the things that you know you should do that you don't do. And you know, he painted it out as, you know, the writer that doesn't write, the dancer that doesn't dance, the painter that doesn't paint, the singer that doesn't sing, you know, in my case, the speaker who doesn't speak. And you know, why is it we don't do what we need to do? And as I'm reading the book, I said, you know what, I know that after I finish reading this book, my life is never going to be the same again. Because this dragging he's calling resistance, I have given into at every turn for the last 30 years. There was just like no doubt in my mind that whenever I met the first little taste of resistance, I didn't do what I needed to do. So I go back home, it's January 1st, and the first thing I decided to do, I was going to go look up those two other people. I call Louis D'Angelo, I make an appointment to go see him. We meet. He says, why are you here? I said, you know, honestly, I have no idea. And I tell him the story. Your name came up, and I met Dale Brown at dinner, and I kept thinking I would run into you, and I never did. And so I came here to see, why are we supposed to meet? And it was very awkward, you know, because he's trying to figure out and suggest things, and I'm going, oh, no. And you know, neither one of us knew really what we were doing there that day. And I wasn't sure if he quite believed in this magical, you know, thing that I was talking about. So I left. He gave me the name of a couple of coaches. People were doing one-on-one coaching, and I ended up meeting those guys just to see what they had to say. And then I called the owner of the yoga studio. Now, in my mind, I was picturing a man, kind of a middle-aged Asian man for some reason. And when the lady answered the phone, you know, she was this young Vietnamese lady. And I said, oh, you know, for some reason I just thought you were going to be a man. She said, well, you know, I was probably a man in a previous life. So that's what you were tapping into. And so I started doing yoga at her studio, and then she also, I was just up for anything. So she said, you know, I do these different little weird healing sessions, and I said, yeah, I'm all in. I want to do everything. And so she started taking me through these, you know, weird visualizations and stuff, and I was digging, I was enjoying it, you know, and I've been doing yoga, you know, ever since then. So I had these, you know, 3 magical guides and kind of helping me along in one way or another. So I went back to this idea of the resistance, and I said, for 30 years, I've given into resistance, and I still managed to do okay. Remember before the falling off the cliff? You know, like I said, I had the bills paid, and my kids were in school, and I was able to afford a car and my own house and everything. And so if I gave into resistance and still managed to do that. What on earth would happen if I actually did what I resisted? And so just to pause for a moment, I want you to think about going back to this idea of your magical path of least resistance. That you have kind of like the yes force, right? The yes force is this go meet these people and hear this little intuitive information bubbling up, a source of this information telling you what to do. That's the yes force. And then you have this resistance, which is the no force, saying, no, you don't want to do that. No, skip that. So you might get an intuitive notion, I should go speak to this group of people, and then simultaneously you would think, well, why should I go up there and risk total humiliation? It'd be better for me just to stay at home and skip that. Well, what's the purpose? And so you have these two opposing forces, these two guiding forces. And I think of the resistance almost as like closed doors. And every time you get the idea, you close that door, you close that door. Well, as you get, older and middle age and stuff, not looking at you, Marvin. That was just random, happened to fall there. It's really your preferences, your personal preference. You know what you like and what you don't like. And as you close door after door, what you don't like, 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 you end up in a tiny little room surrounded by a lot of closed doors. That's where I had, ended up in this little isolated, everything was to my preference, but it was a pretty small world is what you're left with. So I decided for the next 10 years, I'm going to do everything that I resist. Like the moment I resist it, that's what's going to be the cue that this is what I've got to do. And from just a simple state of curiosity of like wondering what would happen if I lived like that, what would happen? I was just totally curious. So I made this commitment just to myself, and I started doing it. And it started with simple things like I would pass the trash can, that needed to be taken out. And, I could, shove a little bit harder down in there, get another half day of, use out of it, or I could just bag that bag up and take it out. So I would pass the garbage can, and I would think I should do it, and then I would keep going. I'd say, oh, resistance, yeah. And then I would just turn, and I would bag up the trash, and I would take the trash out. And then when I went to my office, I saw all the mail, the bills, that I try to get to once a month. And I would see it, no, I'm not going to, that's what I have to do. And I would go up to the pile of bills, and I would just sit there and open those bills and pay what needed to be paid. And most of it's stuff you just throw in the trash can anyway. But, that pile is really intimidating. And, I was trying not to look at it. But now I would just go get it, and I would do it. And I would accept, lunch dates. Oh, we should have lunch, and oh yeah, we should, right? No, okay, Tuesday, 12 o'clock, I would go to lunch. So within weeks, my wife nicknamed me Sir Lunch-a-Lot. Because I was just accepting all these dates and going everywhere. And I went from being this guy who stayed at home all the time to, man, I was like a man about town. And I don't like networking events and everything, and so somebody invites me to a BNI meeting, and I go, and I happen to go on the recruitment day when they're getting new people, and I had made this commitment to say yes to everything. I found myself joining BNI, right? I don't even have any services to provide to anyone in there, but I paid $500, because I was just going with everything. I want to say 3 months later, I was getting jittery. I was so far out of my comfort zone in just 3 months. I was so busy. I had so many appointments. I was involved in so many groups and things. I was shaky, I really felt the urge to, run back home and hide under the blanket because it was just all so new to me to be living like this. At the end of the year, I kind of looked back. And in addition to running my businesses, and keeping the bills paid, it turned out to be this list of additional things that I had accomplished this year, and I'll read a few. I started a mastermind. I joined that networking group. I started doing yoga. She talked me into facilitating this yoga nidra class and coming to the training. I'd started doing it. I created 3 different workshops, an 8-week coaching course, enrolled in Brendan Burchard's Experts Academy. I started doing major apartment renovations, things I had always put off. I restructured all my apartment management systems. I accepted my first paid coaching client, won speaking contest, become the president of GSU Toastmasters, hired 4 consultants to launch my speaking career, joined the NSA, began a career in professional speaking, meditated daily, determined my core desires, my life's purpose, created an accelerator group for all my tenants at my salon, and then on top of that, I did everything I normally did. So at the end of the year, I said, wow, what a year. This is all, I got 9 more to go. Who knows what this is going to turn out like. And I started to wonder, like, is this just me, or would this work for other people? And by this time, I was kind of sharing little nuggets of wisdom on a text group that just started with one friend who said, hey, could you send me something positive every day? And it quickly grew to 200 people. And I would get responses back saying, oh my God, this was the perfect thing. How could you know I needed this today? And I realized people needed this positive input. So I had this small following of 200 people. And I said, at the end of the year, I did a blog post, and I said, I want to lay this challenge out to you. And I want to lay this challenge out to you, too. And I called it the Resistance Challenge. And I said, who is willing for a week to do everything you resist, the smallest thing? In that moment, you just do it. Now, only 15 people had the guts, out of 200. And when I would tell people this, they would go, a week? A week? A whole week? I would have to do this for a week? People are scared to death of doing it for a week. But these 15 people said, I said, now look, I don't want you to report back to me at the end of the week and say, oh, it was great and I really liked it. I want real-time feedback, what's happening, and as you tell me, I'm going to repost out to the 200 people, okay, this is what's happening. 2 days later, I got a new job. I've been putting off going to graduate school for the last 3 years. I applied today. It was just these monumental, life-changing things happening for these people in a week. They only committed to do it for a week, and they were just completely shifting their life. And I still run into some of these people, and by this time they've finished graduate school, they've gone on to careers, they've become nurses. I mean, it was amazing. So the challenge to you is the resistance challenge, is to become aware of that little no force that, I don't, and then see that as, through that door, if you say yes, that is your magical path to least resistance, is to go through the door. Because it takes a hell of a lot more resistance to keep avoiding the mail pile and the garbage. And, I say to people, I have done more work avoiding work than anyone I know. If I just do it, it is the path of least resistance, is where the resistance shows up in your life. And if you combine those two forces, that yes force of that voice, John and I were talking about it right before the meeting. There is that voice, and it's telling you what you need to do. And if you can counteract that no force and walk through those doors, it's telling you this is your magical path of least resistance. Now, going back to right before I fell off the cliff, I had no idea I would end up in front of you today. I had no idea where it was going. It was just a total surrendering to these two forces and letting it guide me, to this moment right here. But when I think back, those 3 people I met, it was a speaker, a healer, and a coach. And now here I stand before you as a speaker, a healer, and a coach. Thank you. And 4 minutes early. Ha. Okay, Dima, come on back up.
Thank you. Wow. I don't know if you can follow that, Bill.